Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at D1Baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, joined as always by my good friend and co-host, Mark Etheridge. Also joined today by my rental car here in the state of Oregon. I am looking live. You can't see it, but I'm looking live at Goss Stadium on the campus of Oregon State University, sitting in a parking garage recording this episode because that was the only way Mark and I could get this done. So apologize in advance if the sound's a little wonky or whatever. It's just not our usual quality. So my apologies. But we wanted to get you an episode on the Mississippi State situation kind of as quickly as we could. Runes and Kendall talked about it on the main podcast that you recorded yesterday. So go back and listen to that as well. I think Mark and I probably have a different take on it. So I think it'll be quite a bit different from that discussion. But for those who, I'm assuming everyone listening knows, but in case you don't, yesterday, that was Monday, April 28th, it was announced that Mississippi State was parting ways with head coach Chris Lemonis. National championship winning coach. 3 years later, he's out. And I'd love to say that, well, I don't know if I'd love to say, but it's just not a surprise, ultimately. The timing, maybe we can talk about it being a surprise, but the fact that it happened, I don't think any of us should be particularly surprised about. So, Mark, you wrote a piece for your Daily Dish that I would highly urge folks to go read because I think it's a really good kind of just lay of the land and how we got here and why we're here and how to think about it from all sides of the issue. So without totally just giving away all the stuff for free there, Mark, tell me a little bit about your kind of initial reaction when the news came down yesterday.
Well, I was surprised at the timing. Primarily because Mississippi State's still alive to make a regional. And there's 3 weeks left in the season. There are 2 home series that they have a great chance to win. There's certainly the road series at Missouri. You'd feel pretty good about their chances there. They could get to 13 or even 14 conference wins. And that is going to put them right in the hunt for a regional berth. But then I started thinking about it a little more. And honestly, at Mississippi State, that's not their thinking. I mean, hoping that you finish strong in the last 3 weeks to sneak into a regional is not where they want to be. And, you know, they had the national championship. And since then, there's been 1 good year and 2 bad years and then an incomplete that's off to a not very good start right now. And with a month left. So I do feel like once I kind of processed the information a little bit, I understood it a little more. And I do think that the trend of the program, if you're going to make a change, you need to understand, do I feel like the status quo as it is right now will get me to where I want to be? And I think we saw the answer to that with this decision. And I also feel like the other part of this is if you've already made up your mind that you're going to make this decision, I don't think you let it play out, because what if he wins in these next few games, goes to a regional and does just enough to make it a more challenging decision? If you've already made up your mind, go ahead and do it and move on to whatever's next. I did see some things about trying to, because of where the transfer portal is, go ahead and make the decision now. I don't know that this really helps that. Going a month with an interim coach, I don't know that that's a factor at all. And I see people kind of hammering that. I would need to be persuaded that this, that this actually is a factor. But anyway, I do feel like it's an interesting job for someone to come in, because you will have incredible facility. You've got great fan base and support. With that come elite expectations, and you're in the toughest league in the country, and it's only getting tougher year after year. So yeah, for a coach who really wants to test himself at the top of the sport, it's going to be super attractive, and that's who Mississippi State's got to go out and grab.
Yeah, and we'll certainly talk about that before we finish here, because Kendall, if you haven't read it, and I'm sure you have if you're really plugged into this situation, but he put out his hot board which of course is a moving target, could
Mhm.
change. But go check that out. That's worth your time. And there's some big fish
Mhm.
in the pond. They're throwing the lure in. So we'll talk about that here shortly. But I'm with you, Mark, in that I generally don't think the portal, whether it was or not, I don't know that it should have been a major consideration. I guess if I really wanted to give it the most charitable interpretation, I would say that at a bare minimum, what you avoid is, let's say State goes to a regional, they're playing into at least the first weekend in June, and some players commit to Lemonis, and then you fire him,
Mhm.
and then it's like, well, now we're starting all over from the portal standpoint. But
Yeah.
that's so minor as to not to me be compelling, and that's thinking small, even if that is a factor. So
Well, I also think that there's always the concern that we're going to lose all our young players when there's a coaching change. So you go ahead and do it early, but I don't know that that really helps because you've got a month with an interim coach, and now there's there's some certainty that obviously there's a coaching change, and you think they're getting tampered with in a normal situation. Oh boy, are those cells going to light up, right? And I do feel like that's that maybe that's a negative of this whole thing, of making the move early. But yeah, if you're going to make the move, I feel like you just go ahead and make it. And today's roster volatility situation is as such that you cannot be held hostage by your roster. You've got to go out and get a leader for your program, give him the opportunities to succeed with whatever financial resources, facilities, whatever it is that he feels are important to win, and let him do his job and build his roster. Because as we've seen, Jim Schlossnagel's in his first year, Texas dominating the conference. Jay Johnson won the title in his second year at LSU. You've had a lot of first-year coaches. Wes Johnson, what he's doing at Georgia, just come in and be able to assemble a talented roster and have success in a short time frame. You're on mute.
yeah. The mute button's not as easily accessible when you're
Yeah.
holding your phone up in your rental car, as it turns out. Yeah, I think that's a great point. Like the whole idea of, well, what if we fall behind in roster building, and I get that, and you have to consider that, but like we've seen time and again that you give a really good coach a week and he'll figure a roster out. We've just seen too many examples of it. One of the other things I was going to touch on here is what kind of job we're talking about with Mississippi State, because I think it's easy to look at Dudy Noble and that fan base and the fact that they went to Omaha, what was it, 4 straight times there, and culminating
Something
in
like that.
yeah, culminating in the national title, and kind of assume that this is like tip of the top type of job. And in the grand scheme of college baseball, it is. But in the rarefied air of the SEC, it's a little more complicated than that. Because especially now, if this is 5 years ago, like I think we're having a different conversation, but now that's great. That Dudy Noble puts you a leg up on everybody else, at least in that regard. Like everybody's going to listen to your pitch because of where you get to play your games. But we now know the NIL piece is probably as important as anything else. And so if I were a high school player, and I'm sure that's not just me, if you say, we'll give you, this X amount of money to play at Mississippi State and play at Dudy Noble, or we'll give you 5X the money to go play at this other school that has not nearly as good a facility, I can tell you where I'm going to play, and it's not in a nicer facility, right? And I don't think that makes me unique as a human being, right? I think we've all made decisions like that in our lives professionally and what have you, to take jobs for financial reasons that might not necessarily have some of the things you were giving up at the last place or what have you. So
Right.
when you take it all into consideration, and look, the thing about NIL is we don't know, right? It's so opaque. But I guess all I'll say is this: Mississippi State is a top job, but it is less of a top job if the administration is not going to finance NIL and whatever else goes into player compensation packages at the same level as LSU, Texas A&M, Texas, Tennessee, Georgia, all of those schools that we know very clearly, even if we don't know the details, we know very clearly are funding their teams that way. If you're not playing in that playground, the rest of the stuff doesn't really matter. And I hate to be so blunt about it, but I think that's the reality.
Yeah. Well, I do think Mississippi State has a invested enough fan base where NIL can be can be at maybe not the very top tier, but really close to it, so that you can, one, retain your top players and not lose that exciting freshman that everybody wants to poach, but also go out and supplement and bring in some difference making players. I do feel like the program is in a position to do that. And I don't know that talent has been the problem. I do feel like you look at all the players drafted, you look at now injuries have been a problem. Um, you know, maybe clutch hitting has been a problem. Defense has been a problem at times. But they've got players, and you look at go look at where we've ranked them in the preseason every year based on look at their roster compared to other teams in the league, and we're not picking them low. Okay, we're picking them high based on that talent, and I do feel like that there's been that's been part of the frustration that you have your higher expectations heading into the season, and then you finish below that, and it's that's a recipe to get coaches in trouble, and that's where we are today.
Let's wrap up by spinning it forward a little bit, Mark. Kendall put out his hot board, and like I mentioned, there are some names there that I think any program in college baseball, maybe not named LSU, Kentucky, or Texas, or not Kentucky, although maybe Kentucky. In a second, you'll know why Kentucky was on my mind. LSU, Tennessee, and Texas are the teams I would say maybe you set those aside, but everyone else would be pretty thrilled with some of the names on the list that Kendall put together. I think, to me, there are two that are extremely intriguing. A lot of good coaches on the list. One is Nick Mingione, and the other is Brian O'Connor, and for different reasons. One is because Nick Mingione is a guy, you rewind the clock 3 years, and he's not even in this conversation, at all. But what he's done at Kentucky has opened some eyes, right? And rightfully so. And I think there is something to be said for, and I don't think he'd mind me saying this. A part of why they've taken that step the last couple of years is because the administration stepped up in a way that State's administration will have to do. So I think we've seen what he can do and Kentucky is still not a program with the most resources, right? They're certainly behind State in this regard.
Oh, sure.
So what could he do with State's resources, right? So that's interesting. And I know for certain Minge and his family love Lexington. I don't have I don't have any doubt about that. I think he's perfectly happy there, would be perfectly happy to retire there. However, I also know he has a soft spot for Starkville, Mississippi, and for Mississippi State. He feels like he owes a lot of his career to John Cohen and his time at Mississippi State. And I understand that. So for any Kentucky fans thinking, well, why would he make that move? I just think, and I've not talked to him about this, but I just think that's one of those situations where the tug on the heartstrings might be strong enough. And it's also State, right? Like, you have to listen, right? So that's one. And then Brian O'Connor's just, anytime you can get a coach who's won a national title and has been to Omaha as consistently as Brian O'Connor has been, that's another guy that I think you have to consider. And here's the last thing I'll say about it. I think he's got the right demeanor to deal with Starkville, because that is a program that has a lot of attention on it, has a lot of media attention on it, is under a lot of scrutiny, and it takes a certain personality to deal with that. And Brian O'Connor, he can get fiery with his players, but from a public persona standpoint, he is about as slow heartbeat as it gets. And I think he's someone who realizes he doesn't have to prove anything to anybody, and he's just going to do his thing, and that's either going to work or it's not. I would bet on it working, but he's a guy I don't think a lot of people would have been associated maybe with this opening. But if Kendall put him on the list, I have to assume that the reporting on that is solid. So, Mark, what stands out to you about Kendall's list, or any thoughts you have on moving forward?
Well, but my first thought, like yours, was Mingione, with his time he spent at Starkville. But then I look in Kendall, and I didn't know this, but Kendall's got the buyout would be $6 million. that is significant, especially when you compare it to others with low buyouts.
Right.
So certainly he would be an attractive candidate, but I don't know that if I'm Mississippi State, I'm $6 million buyout versus somebody else's half
Right.
mil or a million
Right.
or
Yeah.
less.
Do you like him $5 million
Yeah,
more than option B?
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
that's part of it. Certainly with O'Connor, um, I think everyone would want, if you're at the top of the sport and you've accomplished a lot, that kind of coach would be intrigued to come in and run the gauntlet that is the SEC right now. Nothing against the ACC. It's a incredible league, but it's not what you would face week in, week out at Mississippi State. So that would be interesting. I just don't know that he wants to leave. He's been supplanted at Virginia and had many opportunities over the years. Why now? Right? Why would he leave now? There's certainly other candidates. Skip Johnson at Oklahoma would be an interesting one. He's another one I'd thought of, and when he popped up on Kendall's board, I thought, So it's still it's like $2.5 million buyout. It's not 6 mil, but it's still significant. But I feel like he would be a good fit. Wes Johnson, another guy who was an assistant at Mississippi State. I don't know that he should leave Georgia for Mississippi State right now. I think he can do everything at Georgia that that he could do at Mississippi State. But that would be somebody that I would probably talk to. But yeah, I really don't know which way they're going to go. I don't think they're going to go the assistant route, strictly because you have enough established head coaching candidates that I think you're going to be able to get one of these top guys who want to come in. I mean, they tour the facility. They look at all the videos of the great fan base and the support and all of that. And there's so many reasons why you'd want to be part of that. So I feel like they're going to get a top candidate. It's just a question of what that buyout looks like, what the overlay, right? Because you're also you're still paying Lemonis, so you've also got more money out up front to deal with. What's your budget? And it's not just the annual budget; it's all of this at one time. So that's the part I just don't know enough about. But I do feel like with the House settlement, assuming that does work, that does happen, and who knows. It's kind of in flux right now. There are going to be some opportunities to grab people at, we'll say, non-Power 2 conferences that may not be in a great situation financially in their program, and who just want to be a have instead of pushing the rock uphill. And certainly at Mississippi State, while you might not be as have as some of them in your conference against the whole rest of the sport, you're certainly in a top 15 type of situation. So that part will be fascinating as we see all this play out over the next month or so.
Yeah, that's kind of my closing thought here too, is in the bigger picture sense, I think we're going to learn a lot about which baseball programs are all in on doing what it takes to compete in this, let's just call it NIL era, indirectly by what coaches we see involved elsewhere. And we can't draw any conclusions there, but I think I feel pretty confident. We don't know which ones are which, but some of them will be in the mix because they don't feel like they're going to get what they need from the university where they are. I think that's a given.
No one wants to be at a disadvantage. You want to be at a position. Certainly, you're not going to complain publicly about it, but would you rather have more than have to make do with what you have? And I feel like for a lot of coaches, they're going to be drawn to this opportunity, and one of them's going to take it.
Nobody complains publicly except former Maryland basketball coach Kevin Willard, who spent his last couple times on the NCAA tournament dais complaining about Maryland before he left for Villanova. But that's an aside. Interesting situation. Again, not a huge surprise that the news came down. Maybe a little surprise that it came down now. But You do wonder, Mark, if as much as the players and the coaches say, oh, that outside talk doesn't really permeate, we don't really think about that. You do wonder if there's like a little bit of a weight that gets lifted in that clubhouse, feels like maybe playing with a little house money, perhaps. We'll see. It's not an easy path as you've laid out. So, but you do wonder if that does lift something from the team. I mean, we saw this when they got Omaha under Gary Henderson, right? Very different situation. Very different situation.
Yeah, with a lot more time. Right. Yeah.
And a lot more time to figure out who they were as a team. But
I think the closer parallel is Alabama when Jason Jackson took over about this time of year for Brad Bohannon. And they were not playing all that great when this happened, and really caught fire and ended up hosting a regional, which I don't see that for Mississippi State, but they could certainly change the complexion of their season with an upturn right here.
Yeah, that's a good call. That actually is the better comparison. So regardless, it something like that has been done. So we'll have to see. It certainly is going to be interesting to watch the rest of the way. All right, Mark, let's go ahead and get out of here. I'm going to turn off my rental car here and go back in the stadium and watch a baseball game here in a little bit. But just a programming note real quick for listeners. This episode will supplant my usual second episode of the week where I interview a beat writer. Let's just consider this the Mississippi State episode for this season. So that will supplant what normally would be. So just that this is the second episode for the week, and Mark and I will be back at the end of this coming weekend to recap the weekend that was. So thank you all for listening. Thank you to Mark, as always, for joining me. Thank you to Academy Sports and Outdoors and to Covis Boots. We will talk to you all again at the end of the weekend to recap the weekend that was. We'll talk to y'all then.